Hi, my name is Lindsay McLaughlin, and today I am going to be talking about Operation A Freet, one of the two. So this is a story that is written by Paul Anderson, and it came out in around the year of the 1955, so 1940s, 1950s. And so this author has written a lot of different fantastic stories, all based around different happenings. So, like, he has a whole a book and series called Operation Chaos, and then there's Operation Luna, and that sort of thing. So, with that, he has basically his main idea is to use things that are happening in the world and kind of do a little play on them. So his story, Operation A Freet, is about characters who are within the Second World War, and they are basically fighting, and he's using ideas of almost like in a sense like a gothic type of fantasy, because he's using witches, using spells, broomsticks as transportation, as well as a little bit of werewolf usage and through like a lens kind of thing, as well as using the relations of the fighting terminology, in a sense, saying that the sadness that is brought upon the world during the war is almost like the men who are fighting in war, in a sense, in reality, turn into these characters that are like numb, that can do things that they don't even know that they're able to do. So that's what I think the true meaning of this story is, to kind of say that, like, the war that they're fighting is almost similar to a fantasy war, and kind of playing on the words with like the atomic bomb and that sort of thing. Like, how could it get to that level? And it's almost like animals or werewolves or witches fighting witches, in a sense. So it sort of has that play in it, which is kind of cool to figure that out. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story. So it starts off with the main character, which it doesn't identify, but I believe it is a male main character, because he does talk about his, dream, or kind of, maybe it is sort of like a crush type thing for him and this girl, Virginia, who's in the war. But they talk about how everyone is very serious, and they're just trying to stay alive, in a sense. So they wish, if the war wasn't happening, that there could be something that happens, and there's all this talk about, if there wasn't, it would be nice if this could happen or that could happen. And so yeah, so that's kind of at the beginning. So it starts off with the main character, which is in the point of the view of the reader, and it kind of has a little bit of what is called a narrative that is what is the narrative? A fractured narrative. So it kind of goes between the future and the past, kind of thing. But it is a fractured narrative, but almost in a chronological order. So it has a mixture of both. So it starts off with these characters kind of in this world of warfare. And in the world of warfare, they're able to, they talk about, like they're smoking cigars. They are they're talking about the Air Force. They're talking about the Army. It almost seems like they're within the war until they mention, like, it seems like a normal story. Like, it doesn't seem like there would be a little bit of fiction. It's kind of this fantasy that seems like almost like nonfiction. However, it isn't, and it's hard to kind of follow out until, in terms of the line between the fantasy and not, because all of a sudden, they'll be talking about, all the places that they have to go to, and like the base and the camp and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, once we go travel on our broomsticks, and then you're just kind of caught off guard because you're like, oh, okay, what's happening? So you figure out that there is that fantastic element, and they do mention what kind of categorizes the genre of the fantasy would be the fact that they talk about cemeteries and corpses, and there's this big thing that it's almost it almost has like a little bit of futuristic aspects to it, because they talk about there's no cremation allowed, so everyone is just buried, and it's against the law, and it's kind of weird, but I guess it's because it's related to the war. And so there's this huge thing with that. So then they're talking about corpses and cemeteries. And so even though it's like a war and it's a historical fantasy, it has that sense of gothic, because it talks about death and corpses, and it has the witches and the werewolves. So it falls under that category. Now, the cycle of the monomyth that happens within the story is the kind of like the battle of the main character to stay alive and protect who he's with, like with Virginia and Vandenberg, or Vandenberg. You can see that they are always just trying to stay alive, and there's a point where I think the main character says like he just feels numb from the fighting and from just the trying to just stay alive and that sort of thing, and that kind of targets the whole cycle. It's almost like the disbelief of what's going on and that sort of thing, and and then it goes into the characters saying that the main character, I believe, is actually called Steve, and he talks about almost like it's like they have their two characters. So they have like their normal human characters, which are not in the war, and then which are the ones that are not fighting, and then they have their supernatural characters, which are it says in the book that it's like, oh, I am now a wolf, now I am numb, and it's like the training that they've had since they were babies, so that they could maintain this level of almost like a cold-heartedness, so that they could fight during the war. So Steve actually meets Virginia in the war, and the war, within the war, that they're able to use an element of magic, so they're able to fight against the enemy, and it's when they are in the war, they talk about their tails and their abilities to claw down and bite into the other enemies. So it shows that when they're fighting, they become these werewolves, and it kind of relates to what's going on. It's like in traditional the Second World War, when people were fighting, they have to it's like putting on a fake face, a poker face, so that they can fight and not really relate to what they're doing, which is killing. And then at the end, it talks about how they all come back to the real world, and they become human again. And it's this level of uncertainty, and so that's what's kind of captured in the story by Paul, and it's one of these fantastic stories that kind of reveals the secrets of the world war, in a fictional way. Thank you.